The old telephone booth stood like a forgotten monument on the corner of Maple Street, where the city lights barely reached, and inside it Zylara pressed her body against the cold glass walls, trying to make herself invisible to the world outside. Her purple skin shimmered faintly in the darkness, and her silver eyes tracked every movement on the street with the precision of a trained scout. Because 3 weeks ago she had crash-landed on this planet called Earth, and every day since then had been a fight for survival. The rain started as a light drizzle, but quickly turned into a downpour that hammered against the booth roof, creating a rhythm that reminded Zylara of the ion storms back home on Krynn, where she had trained as a warrior. In the Royal Academy, before being selected for the deep space reconnaissance programs, she had been mapping an uninhabited sector when her ship systems malfunctioned, and the navigation computer went dark, and the emergency thrusters fired randomly, sending her vessel spiraling toward the blue-green planet that the humans called Earth. The crash had destroyed most of her equipment, including the long-range communicator that could have called for rescue, and the only items that survived were her energy blade, a damaged disguise field generator, and a data recorder that she had been using to document everything she observed about this strange new world. Zylara remembered the first human she encountered after crawling from the wreckage, in the forest outside the city, and it was a young boy who had been exploring the woods with his dog, and when the boy saw her ship burning among the trees, he ran toward it instead of away. She had hidden behind a large tree, watching as the boy pulled emergency supplies from the crash site and left them in a neat pile before running back toward the city. And this confused Zylara, because on her world valuable salvage belonged to whoever found it first. Yet this child had left everything untouched. That night she used the supplies the boy left behind, including water purification tablets and protein bars and bandages for the cuts on her arms. And she wondered why a human child would help a crashed alien vessel without knowing who or what was inside. Next morning she activated her disguise field and walked into the city wearing clothes she found in an abandoned building. And the technology created a shimmer around her that made humans see a normal woman instead of her true purple-skinned form. But the disguise field had been damaged in the crash, and it flickered randomly, especially when she was stressed or injured, and this meant she had to stay away from crowds and avoid close contact with anyone, because one flicker could expose her true identity. Zylara spent the first week observing humans from a distance, learning their language by listening to conversations and watching their television broadcasts through store windows, and she was amazed by how much information they shared freely. Through their networks and media on Krynn, knowledge was power, and power was guarded jealously by those who possessed it. But humans created vast libraries of information that anyone could access, and they built schools where they taught their young everything they knew without demanding servitude in return. She watched as humans helped elderly people cross busy streets, and she saw them donate food to shelters, and she observed how they formed communities that protected their weakest members. And all of this contradicted everything she had been taught about this species. The elders on Krynn called humans weak and primitive, and said they were barely evolved primates who had stumbled upon technology. They did not understand, but Zylara was beginning to suspect that the elders were wrong, or perhaps they were deliberately lying. During her second week on Earth, she witnessed an accident when a vehicle collided with another at an intersection, and instead of fighting over who was responsible, the humans immediately checked if anyone was injured and called for medical assistance and worked together to clear the road. One of the drivers was clearly at fault, but the other driver showed no anger, only concern for everyone's safety, and this behavior mystified Zylara, because on Krynn such an incident would have resulted in a challenge duel, or at minimum a demand for compensation. She found shelter in abandoned buildings and ate food she purchased using currency she took from a lost wallet she found in a park, and she left an equivalent value in precious metals from her survival kit, because even though she was stranded, she would not become a thief. The telephone booth became her refuge during the third week when the hunters arrived, because she felt their scanning pulses sweep across the city, like invisible waves searching for her unique biosignature that marked her as Krynn. The hunters were elite soldiers sent to retrieve or eliminate any scout who failed to report back on schedule, and Zylara knew they would not stop searching until they found her. Because failure was not tolerated in the Krynn military, she had considered trying to contact them and explain what happened, but she knew the truth would not matter. Because a damaged ship meant a failed mission, and a failed mission meant execution or imprisonment. and neither option appealed to her. So she ran and hid, moving from place to place, always staying one step ahead of their detection equipment, and using every trick she had learned during her training to mask her presence and avoid their patrols. The telephone booth on Maple Street was perfect because it was old and forgotten and surrounded by buildings that created interference with scanning equipment, and the metal frame provided some shielding from detection pulses. Silara had been hiding in the booth for 6 hours now, watching the rain and the people and thinking about everything she had learned since arriving on Earth and wondering if maybe the elders were wrong about more than just humans. A woman with red hair walked past, talking on her phone and laughing at something the person on the other end said, and her joy was so genuine and unguarded that Zylara felt something strange in her chest, like a tightness that made breathing difficult. Unkrin emotions were weaknesses to be controlled and suppressed, but humans wore their feelings openly, sharing happiness and sadness with equal freedom, and this made them vulnerable, but also somehow stronger because they supported each other through difficulties. Zylara thought about Lucy, the human woman who had found her collapsed in an alley during the second week and brought water and food without asking questions. And when Zylara tried to pay her, Lucy refused and said she hoped someone would do the same for her daughter if she ever needed help. The concept of helping strangers without expecting payment was foreign to Kryn culture, where every action had a price and every favor created a debt. But humans seemed to operate on different rules where kindness was given freely. Another scanning pulse swept past, closer this time, and Zylara felt her disguise field flicker as the hunter technology probed the area, and she knew they were narrowing down her location block by block. She had maybe an hour before they found her, and she needed to decide whether to run again or make a stand and fight. Even though one soldier against a full hunter squad was suicide. Small girl ran toward the telephone booth, seeking shelter from the rain, and Zylara held perfectly still, activating her damaged disguise field and praying it would hold, because she could not let this child see her true form. The girl stopped outside, peering through the glass, and Zylara watched her with silver eyes that had witnessed so much in 3 short weeks. And the disguise field shimmered, creating an illusion of emptiness. The girl's mother called from nearby, and the child ran off, leaving Zylara alone again with her thoughts and her failing equipment and her growing certainty that everything she had believed about humans was wrong. They were not weak, they were resilient, and they were not primitive. They were innovative, and they were not cruel. They were compassionate, and these qualities made them dangerous. Not because they would attack, but because they represented everything. Kryn was not. Zylara pulled out her data crystal and looked at it, knowing that the information she had gathered could change how her people viewed humanity, but only if someone survived to deliver it, and right now, survival seemed increasingly unlikely. The rain continued falling, and the city lights reflected off wet pavement, and Zylara made a decision that would change everything because she was tired of running and tired of being afraid and tired of serving a culture that valued strength over kindness. She would seek help from the humans and trust that the compassion she had witnessed was real, and hope that they would protect her from the hunters who were coming. And if she was wrong, then at least she would die. Knowing she had tried something different, the scanning pulse hit again, stronger and closer, and Zylara knew the time, for hiding was almost over. Zylara stepped out of the telephone booth into the rain, and the cold drops hit her face, washing away the last traces of doubt about her decision. Because she had chosen to trust humanity despite everything her training had taught her about staying hidden. The street was busier now as people emerged from shelter and went about their evening routines, and several of them glanced at her curiously because her purple skin was fully visible without the disguise field, and her silver eyes reflected the streetlights in an unmistakably alien way. A woman carrying grocery bags stopped suddenly, nearly dropping them as she stared at Zylara with wide eyes, and her mouth opened as if to scream. But no sound came out, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other across 10 feet of wet pavement. Zylara raised her hand slowly, palms out in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace, and she spoke in carefully practiced English, saying that she needed help and she meant no harm to anyone. The woman, named Claire as Zylara would later learn, slowly set down her grocery bags and took a cautious step forward instead of running away, and her voice shook slightly when she asked if Zylara was hurt or in danger. This simple question nearly broke Zylara's composure, because after 3 weeks of hiding and running, a stranger was offering help before even knowing the full situation. and this was so fundamentally human that Zylara felt that strange tightness in her chest again. She explained quickly that there were others looking for her and they were not friendly, and she had been observing humans since her ship crashed, and she believed they were good people who might help someone in trouble. Claire listened without interrupting, and when Zylara finished, Claire pulled out her phone and said she was calling her brother, who was a police officer, and he would know what to do. And Zylara felt panic rise because involving human authorities seemed dangerous, but Claire assured her that her brother Danny was a good man who had helped many people in difficult situations, and that the police existed to protect people regardless of where they came from, and Zylara wanted desperately to believe this. Within minutes, a police vehicle arrived and a tall man in uniform stepped out looking at Zylara with surprise but not fear, and he introduced himself as Officer Danny Martinez and asked Claire if she was okay. Claire explained what Zylara had told her, and Danny listened carefully, then looked up at the sky where dark shapes were beginning to circle high above the city, moving in patterns that no human aircraft would use. Danny immediately radioed for backup and told Claire to get inside a nearby store, and he positioned himself between Zylara and the street, with his hand near his weapon but not drawing it, and Zylara realized he was protecting her, not threatening her. More police vehicles arrived along with an unmarked car that contained two people in dark suits, who identified themselves as federal agents named Karen Bishop and Tom Holland, and they worked for an agency that investigated unusual phenomena. Karen approached Zylara calmly and asked basic questions about where she was from and why hunters were pursuing her and what she needed to stay safe. And Zylara answered truthfully because lying seemed pointless now. She explained that she was a scout from Kryn who had crash-landed accidentally, and her people would either retrieve her or eliminate her to prevent cultural contamination, and the hunters circling above were likely preparing to do the latter. Tom was already on his phone coordinating with military contacts, while Karen continued talking to Zylara in a calm, steady voice that reminded her of the instructors back at the academy who trained soldiers to stay focused during crisis situations. Danny had established a perimeter keeping curious onlookers away and directing traffic around the area, and Zylara noticed how all the humans worked together smoothly, each person knowing their role without needing detailed instructions. A military helicopter arrived carrying soldiers with sophisticated weapons, and a woman in uniform who introduced herself as Colonel Helen Rodriguez, and she took command of the situation with quiet authority that reminded Zylara of Kryn officer. Shellen asked Zylara direct questions about Kryn military capabilities and hunter squad tactics and standard operating procedures for retrieval missions, and Zylara provided detailed answers because she had decided to trust these humans completely. The colonel listened carefully, then made decisions rapidly, ordering her soldiers to establish a defensive position and coordinating with Air Force units to monitor the hunter ships and preparing evacuation routes for nearby civilians. Zylara was impressed by how quickly the human military mobilized and how they prioritized civilian safety above everything else, because on Kryn, civilians were expected to stay out of military affairs or accept the consequences. Within an hour, a secure perimeter had been established around several city blocks, and civilians had been evacuated to shelters, and anti-aircraft systems were being positioned on rooftops, and all of this happened because one woman had chosen to help a stranger. Helen explained that Zylara would be taken to a secure facility where she could provide more information about her people, and the humans would offer protection in exchange for knowledge that could help prepare Earth for future contact with other species. Zylara agreed immediately because this seemed like a fair exchange, and it was far better than being hunted through the streets or executed by her own people for failing her mission as they prepared to move. Zylara asked to speak with Claire again because she wanted to thank the woman who had shown kindness, when fear would have been more logical. Claire came over, escorted by Danny, and Zylara tried to find words adequate to express her gratitude, but her English was limited and her emotions were confusing, and all she could say was, "Thank you for helping me when you did not have." Claire smiled and said that anyone would have done the same, and Zylara wanted to tell her that no, not anyone would have done this, because on her world such kindness toward strangers was considered foolish weakness. But the words would not come. Danny told Zylara that his sister had always been like this, helping people, even when it was inconvenient or risky. And Claire laughed and said their mother raised them to treat others the way they wanted to be treated. This simple philosophy struck Zylara deeply, because it was so different from Kryn culture where the strong took what they wanted and the weak learned to survive or perished. Trying, the hunter ships descended lower now, clearly preparing for an assault, and Helen ordered everyone to move quickly toward the armored vehicles that would transport Zylara to the secure facility. Suddenly, bright lights flooded the street as the hunter ships activated their weapon systems and targeting beams, swept across buildings searching for Zylara's biosignature. Helen pushed Zylara toward the nearest vehicle while soldiers formed a protective barrier and Karen and Tom flanked her other side, ensuring she stayed covered from above. The first energy blast hit a building roof, sending debris raining down, and civilians screamed as they ran for cover, and Danny stayed behind helping an elderly man who had trouble walking. Zylara saw this and something inside her shifted, because this human officer was risking his life for a stranger while she ran to safety, and this was wrong according to everything she understood about survival. She broke away from Karen and ran back to help Danny and the elderly man, and Helen shouted at her to return. But Zylara ignored the order because some things were more important than following commands. She reached Danny, just as another blast hit nearby, and she used her superior strength to lift the elderly man and carry him to safety, while Danny provided covering fire at the hunter ships with his service weapon. The bullets had no effect on the shielded ships, but the gesture mattered because Danny was defending her despite the futility of his weapon, and this kind of courage was worth more than any advanced technology. They reached the armored vehicle and Zylara placed the elderly man inside gently, then climbed in herself while soldiers returned fire with more powerful weapons that actually seemed to damage the hunter shields. As the vehicle sped away, Zylara looked back at the telephone booth where she had hidden just an hour ago, and she thought about how much had changed because she chose to trust instead of hide. Helen sat across from her and said, "That was brave but stupid," and Zylara agreed, but said she learned it from watching humans. And Helen actually smiled at this. The secure facility was underground beneath a military base, and it contained laboratories and living quarters and command centers filled with technology that impressed Zylara because humans had developed sophisticated systems despite being so young as a species. She was given quarters that were comfortable and surprisingly respectful of her needs, and doctors examined her injuries, carefully asking permission before each procedure and explaining what they were doing. This consideration amazed Zylara because Kryn medical staff treated soldiers as military property that needed maintenance, not as individuals deserving respect and dignity. The underground facility became Zylara's new home, and she spent her days working with human scientists and military strategists, sharing everything she knew about Kryn technology and culture, and the various species her people had encountered during their expansion across the galaxy. Dr. Patricia Moore led the scientific team, and she treated Zylara with genuine curiosity, rather than treating her as a specimen to be studied, and she asked questions about Kryn biology and society with the enthusiasm of someone who truly wanted to understand. Zylara learned that Patricia had spent her entire career studying the possibility of alien life, and now that she had proof standing in front of her, she was almost giddy with excitement, and this childlike joy and discovery reminded Zylara why she had become a scout. The military debriefings were more intense because Colonel Rodriguez needed tactical information about Kryn capabilities and intentions and potential weaknesses that could help defend Earth if the hunters returned with reinforcements. Zylara provided detailed specifications of Kryn weapon systems and ship designs and military doctrine, because she had decided that her loyalty now belonged to the people who protected her rather than the empire that wanted her dead. She explained that Kryn society was built on strict hierarchy, where strength determined status and the weak existed only to serve the strong, and questioning authority was considered treason, punishable by death or slavery. Helen listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. And when Zylara finished, Helen said this sounded like several human cultures throughout history that had eventually collapsed under their own brutality. This surprised Zylara because she assumed humans had always been the compassionate, cooperative people she observed. But Helen explained that humanity had survived countless wars and genocides and oppressive regimes before slowly learning better ways. Patricia added that humans were not naturally good or evil, but rather products of their culture and education, and that any society could choose cooperation over domination, if enough people decided to change. Ilara found this concept fascinating because, on Kryn, the social structure was considered natural and unchangeable like gravity or the speed of light, but humans suggested that cultures could evolve and improve over time. During her third week at the facility, Zylara was allowed visitors, and Claire came with Danny, bringing homemade food and flowers and treating Zylara like a friend rather than an alien curiosity. They sat in Zylara's quarters eating cookies that Claire had baked, and Claire asked questions about Kryn culture and Zylara's family and what life was like growing up on another planet. Zylara explained that she had been selected for the Scout program at age 12, based on her physical abilities and aptitude scores, and she had trained for 8 years before being assigned to deep space reconnaissance. Claire looked sad when Zylara mentioned being taken from her family so young, and asked if Zylara missed them. And Zylara realized she had not thought about her parents in years, because attachment to family was considered weakness in military culture. Danny asked what Zylara planned to do now that she could not return home, and Zylara admitted she had not thought that far ahead because she had been focused on survival rather than building a future. Claire suggested that Zylara could stay on Earth and maybe help humans prepare for eventual contact with other species, and share her knowledge in exchange for a home and safety. This idea appealed to Zylara more than she expected, because during her weeks observing humans, she had seen things that made her question everything she believed about strength and civilization and purpose. She had watched human parents sacrifice their own comfort for their children, and she had seen strangers help each other during emergencies, and she had observed how humans created art and music and literature for no practical purpose except beauty. On Kryn, such activities were considered wasteful because time should be spent training or working or otherwise improving one's status, but humans seemed to understand that life needed more than mere survival. Patricia visited frequently, bringing books about Earth history and human culture, and they would spend hours discussing the differences between their peoples and why those differences existed. Zylara learned about human philosophy and ethics and the long, slow progress toward recognizing that all people deserved dignity, regardless of strength or status or usefulness. She read about human rights movements and civil rights leaders who fought against oppression, and she studied how humans gradually expanded their circle of compassion to include more and more groups. Patricia explained that this expansion was not complete, and humans still struggled with prejudice and inequality, but the trajectory was clear that humanity was learning to be better than its worst instincts. Colonel Rodriguez arranged for Zylara to meet with diplomats and politicians who wanted to understand the broader galactic situation and what Earth could expect from future contact with alien species. Zylara explained that the galaxy was dominated by several major empires, including Kryn, who competed for resources and territory, and most species were evaluated based on their potential. As allies, slaves, or threats, Earth was currently beneath notice because humans lacked faster than light travel and had not expanded beyond their own solar system. But this would change once humanity developed the necessary technology. The diplomats asked how long Earth had before this happened, and Zylara estimated perhaps 50 to 100 years based on the rate of human technological advancement she had observed. This timeline worried the politicians because 50 years was not long enough to prepare adequate defenses or establish diplomatic relationships or develop the technology needed to compete with established empires. But Zylara offered hope by explaining that humans possessed qualities that made them potentially more formidable than any species she had encountered during her training and travels. She told them about human cooperation and innovation, and the ability to unite against common threats, and most importantly, the human capacity to inspire loyalty through kindness rather than fear. The Kryn Empire ruled through intimidation and conquest, but their subject species obeyed out of fear, not loyalty, and would rebel the moment they sensed weakness. Humans, however, built alliances based on mutual benefit and respect, and these bonds were much stronger because people chose to cooperate rather than being forced. Several months passed, and Zylara settled into her new life at the facility, teaching classes about alien cultures and helping scientists understand Kryn technology and working with military strategists to develop defensive systems. She learned to cook human food and developed a fondness for Italian cuisine, especially pasta with tomato sauce, and she started watching human movies, fascinated by how they told stories about heroes and villains and redemption. One day, Patricia asked Zylara what she thought made humans different from other species, and Zylara considered the question carefully before answering. She said that most species, including Kryn, focused on individual survival or tribal survival, but humans had somehow expanded their survival instinct to include strangers and even other species. This was illogical from an evolutionary perspective, because resources spent helping strangers could have been used to benefit oneself or one's family, but humans did it anyway. Patricia suggested this came from human intelligence, allowing them to understand that cooperation benefited everyone in the long term, even if it cost something in the short term. Zylara agreed, but added that intelligence alone was not enough because Kryn were highly intelligent, but had not developed the same cooperative tendencies. Perhaps it was something about human history or brain structure or culture that encouraged empathy and imagination, allowing humans to put themselves in others' positions and care about their suffering. Whatever the reasons, Zylara had concluded that this quality made humans dangerous in the best possible way, because an empire built on compassion would be far more stable than one built on fear. News arrived that the hunter ships had departed Earth orbit after several skirmishes with human military forces, and it appeared the Kryn Empire had decided that retrieving one scout was not worth fighting an emerging species. Colonel Rodriguez believed this was because Zylara had provided enough information about human capabilities to make Kryn leadership cautious about escalating the conflict. Zylara was relieved because she did not want her presence to cause a war between her former people and her adopted home. But she also felt a strange sadness, because this meant she was truly cut off from Kryn. Forever, Claire visited that evening and found Zylara sitting quietly in her quarters looking at pictures of Earth on a tablet, and Claire asked if she was feeling homesick. Zylara explained that she was not missing Kryn exactly, but rather mourning the loss of certainty, because she had always known her purpose and place in society even if she did not like it. Now she had freedom to choose her own path, but this freedom came with uncertainty about who she was supposed to be and what she was supposed to do with her life. Claire sat beside her and said that every human struggled with these same questions, and maybe having uncertainty was better than having your whole life predetermined by others. Zylara thought about this and realized Claire was right, because the freedom to choose meant the freedom to become someone better than what her society had planned. A year passed since Zylara first stepped out of that telephone booth, and her life had transformed in ways she never imagined possible when she was fleeing through rainy streets trying to survive another day. She had become an official advisor to the United Nations, working with representatives from every country, helping them understand the galactic political landscape and the various species humanity might encounter in the coming decades. The work was challenging because human governments were fractured and competitive, often more concerned with maintaining power over each other than preparing for external threats. And this frustrated Zylara, who was accustomed to Kryn centralized command structure. But Patricia explained that human diversity of government was actually a strength because it prevented any single group from gaining too much power and encouraged innovation through competition of ideas. Zylara was learning to appreciate this perspective, even though it made coordination more difficult because she had seen how Kryn rigid hierarchy stifled creativity and punished anyone who questioned established methods. She gave presentations to military academies about alien combat tactics, and she consulted with aerospace companies, developing new propulsion systems, and she worked with linguists creating frameworks for communicating with non-human species. In her free time, Zylara explored human culture with enthusiastic curiosity, trying different foods and reading literature, and learning to play the guitar badly. But with determination, Claire had become her closest friend, and they met regularly for coffee at a small cafe near the facility, where Zylara had been given limited freedom to move around the city under discreet security protection. During one of these meetings, Claire asked if Zylara ever felt lonely, being the only member of her species on Earth, and Zylara admitted that sometimes she missed having someone who truly understood where she came from, but she added that loneliness was better than the isolation she felt on Kryn, where showing vulnerability was dangerous, and forming genuine connections was seen as weakness that enemies could exploit. Claire told her about human support groups where people with shared experiences helped each other, and suggested that maybe Zylara could find community among humans who had felt like outsiders in their own societies. This led Zylara to volunteer at a refugee center, where she met people who had fled war and persecution and understood what it meant to leave everything behind and start over in a strange land. The refugees were initially startled by her appearance but quickly accepted her once they realized she was also displaced and searching for belonging. And they shared stories about their homelands and the journeys that brought them to safety. Zylara found unexpected comfort in these connections because even though their specific experiences differed, the underlying feelings of loss and hope and determination to build new lives were universal. She helped teach English classes to new arrivals and assisted with job training programs, and discovered that helping others adapt to Earth somehow helped her adapt as well. One evening, Danny invited Zylara to his family dinner, and she met his parents and siblings and cousins and experienced the warmth of a large family gathering where everyone talked over each other and laughed and argued and clearly loved each other deeply. This was so different from Kryn formal family structures where relationships were defined by duty rather than affection, and meals were efficient affairs focused on nutrition rather than connection. Danny's mother Maria insisted on serving Zylara huge portions of every dish and asked detailed questions about her health and happiness and whether she was eating enough, and Zylara felt overwhelmed by this maternal attention. After dinner, Maria pulled Zylara aside and said that any friend of her children was family, and if Zylara ever needed anything, she should not hesitate to ask. And this simple declaration of acceptance made Zylara cry for the first time since arriving on Earth. Maria hugged her without hesitation and said it was okay to cry and that tears were not weakness but rather proof that someone cared deeply. And Zylara realized she had found something on Earth she never had. On Kryn, Patricia noticed the change in Zylara after the family dinner and commented that she seemed more relaxed and open. And Zylara explained that she was learning that strength did not require emotional isolation. They were working in the laboratory analyzing samples of Kryn technology that Zylara had salvaged from her crashed ship, and Patricia was fascinated by the biological components integrated into the systems. Kryn had developed biotechnology far beyond Earth capabilities because they viewed machines and living tissue as equally valid engineering materials, and this allowed them to create devices that could self-repair and adapt. Patricia asked if Zylara would be willing to provide biological samples to help human scientists understand Kryn physiology and potentially develop medical treatments that worked across species. Zylara agreed because she trusted Patricia completely and believed this knowledge could help both species, and over the following months, she participated in numerous medical studies that advanced human understanding of alien biology. The research revealed that Kryn and humans were more similar than expected, sharing common biochemical pathways despite evolving on different planets, and this suggested that life throughout the galaxy might follow similar patterns. This discovery excited scientists because it meant that future contact with alien species would be less complicated than feared, and medical care could potentially be adapted to work with multiple species. Colonel Rodriguez used this information to develop new strategic doctrines, based on the assumption that humanity would eventually join a galactic community, and needed to prepare for both cooperation and conflict. Zylara helped design training programs teaching military personnel about alien psychology and culture and the mistakes to avoid when encountering unknown species. She emphasized that many conflicts in galactic history started from misunderstandings and cultural differences rather than genuine incompatibility, and that patience and curiosity could prevent unnecessary wars. The Colonel appreciated this perspective because she had seen how human conflicts often escalated from similar misunderstandings, and she believed humanity could learn from the mistakes of older species. 2 years after her arrival, Zylara was granted permanent residency on Earth with full legal status and rights, and this made her officially the first alien citizen of any human nation. The ceremony was small and private at her request, because she did not want publicity, but Claire and Danny and Patricia and Helen all attended along with Maria, who cried happy tears and hugged everyone. Zylara made a short speech thanking the humans who had shown her kindness and given her a home when her own people wanted her dead, and she promised to spend her life helping protect and prepare Earth for its future, among the stars. Afterward, they went to the cafe where Zylara and Claire usually met, and they celebrated with coffee and pastries, and Zylara felt a contentment she had not known was possible. Danny joked that Zylara was now officially his sister too, since she was family, and this meant he could embarrass her at every opportunity, just like he did with Clairzy. Lara laughed and said she looked forward to it because having siblings who teased you meant you belonged somewhere, and that was worth any embarrassment. Maria announced that Zalara would be attending all future family dinners and holidays, and there would be no arguments about this, and Zalara agreed happily because these gatherings had become the highlight of her weeks as the sun set. They walked through the city together, and Zalara noticed the telephone booth on Maple Street where everything had changed, and she stopped to look at it. Claire asked if she ever regretted stepping out of that booth and revealing herself to the humans, who might have reacted with fear instead of kindness. Zalara shook her head and said it was the best decision she ever made because hiding forever was not. Living and trusting humanity had given her something she never had on Krynn. She had found freedom to choose her own path and friends who valued her for who she was, rather than her utility and purpose that came from helping others instead of conquering them. Danny said that humanity was lucky to have her, and Zalara replied that she was the lucky one because she had discovered what civilization could be when it was built on compassion instead of domination. They continued walking and talking and laughing together, and Zalara realized that she had not just survived her crash landing on Earth, but had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found home not in a place but in the connections she had built with people who chose to help. A stranger hiding in a telephone booth on a rainy night. Patricia asked what Zalara thought would happen when other species discovered that Earth had welcomed a Krynn scout instead of turning her away, and Zalara said it would send a powerful message. It would show the galaxy that humanity judged individuals by their actions rather than their origins, and that Earth would offer sanctuary to anyone who sought peace regardless of where they came from. This philosophy might seem naive to older civilizations, but Zalara believed it was actually sophisticated wisdom, because building alliances through trust was more powerful than building empires through fear. Helen added that Earth would need every ally it could find in the coming years, and treating refugees with dignity might convince other species that humanity deserved friendship rather than conquest. 5 years had passed since that rainy night when Zalara stepped out of a telephone booth and changed the course of her life, and in many ways the course of human history as well. Earth had transformed its approach to space exploration and defense. Based on the knowledge she provided, and dozens of countries had united to form a collaborative space agency dedicated to preparing humanity for galactic contact. Zalara served as the chief advisor to this agency, helping design protocols for first contact scenarios and training astronauts in alien cultural awareness and developing technologies that could compete with more advanced civilizations. But her life was not just about work, because she had built a rich personal life filled with friendships and experiences that made her understand why humans fought so hard to protect their way of life. She had learned to surf on the California coast and attended concerts where the music moved her in ways Krynn ceremonial drums never had, and she had traveled to see the northern lights and ancient temples and natural wonders that took her breath away. Claire had gotten married to a teacher named Paul, and they had asked Zalara to be part of the wedding party and standing beside her friend during the ceremony. Zalara finally understood human concepts of love and commitment. The couple had chosen each other freely based on mutual affection rather than genetic compatibility or social advantage, and they made promises to support each other through difficulties even though no authority forced them to. This voluntary dedication to another person's well-being seemed illogical from a purely rational perspective, but Zalara had learned that humans understood something deeper than logic about what made life worth living. Danny had been promoted to detective, and he often consulted with Zalara on cases involving unusual technology or suspected alien artifacts, and they had become an effective team solving several mysteries together. Maria continued to feed Zalara at family dinners and fuss over her health, and introduce her to every eligible person she knew, because Maria had decided that Zalara needed to find love. Like Claire. Had Zalara tried to explain that Krynn did not form romantic partnerships the way humans did, and besides, there were no other Krynn on Earth. But Maria waved this away, saying love was not limited by species. Patricia had become the director of alien research at a major university, and her work on Krynn biology had won numerous awards and advanced human understanding of how life could develop along different evolutionary paths. They still met weekly to discuss science and philosophy, and Patricia had become like a mentor helping Zylara navigate human academic culture and encouraging her to publish papers about Kryn society. Zylara had written extensively about her observations of humanity and how human cooperation could serve as a model for other species, and her writings had been translated into dozens of languages. Humans criticized her work, saying she idealized humanity and ignored their capacity for violence and cruelty. And Zylara acknowledged these points because she knew humans were not perfect, but she argued that humanity's unique strength was not their absence of flaws, but rather their willingness to acknowledge mistakes and work toward improvement. Unlike Kryn, who denied any possibility of being wrong, this self-awareness and desire for growth made humanity dangerous to oppressive empires because it meant humans would constantly evolve and adapt, while rigid hierarchies remained stuck in outdated patterns. Colonel Rodriguez had retired from active military service but continued working as a security consultant, and she remained one of Zylara's closest allies in preparing Earth defenses. They had developed a network of early warning satellites that could detect incoming ships and negotiated secret agreements with several minor alien species who visited Earth to trade information. These species were curious about the planet that had welcomed a Kryn defector, and some had even established small communities on Earth, finding refuge from persecution in their home systems. Zylara helped these newcomers adapt, teaching them about human culture and helping them find work and advocating for their rights, because she remembered how frightening it was to be alone on an alien world. Earth was slowly becoming known in certain galactic circles as a sanctuary for those seeking freedom, and this reputation brought both opportunities and dangers. Some species saw Earth as a potential ally, while others viewed it as a threat to the established order. And the Kryn Empire in particular was not pleased that one of their former scouts was helping humanity prepare to resist their expansion. Zylara received anonymous threats warning her to stop helping humans or face consequences, and Helen insisted on increasing security around her, despite Zylara's protests that she could defend herself. One night while walking home from dinner, Zylara was ambushed by 3 Kryn assassins who had infiltrated Earth specifically to eliminate her and prevent her from sharing any more secrets. The fight was brief and brutal because Zylara had not forgotten her combat training, and she had the advantage of knowing human urban terrain better than her attackers did. She defeated 2 assassins and captured the 3rd, who she turned over to human authorities, and this incident convinced Earth governments that they needed to take the threat from hostile aliens more seriously. The captured assassin eventually agreed to defect after witnessing how humans treated prisoners with dignity and provided legal representation, and he became the second Kryn to seek refuge on Earth. His name was Vex, and he was younger than Zylara, and had been raised on propaganda about human weakness, and he was shocked to discover that everything he had been taught was lie. Zylara helped Vex adjust to life on Earth, and watching him go through the same transformation she had experienced reminded her how far she had come since hiding in that telephone booth. Vex asked her one day if she ever regretted defecting, and Zylara said no, because living freely among humans was better than serving an empire that valued her only as a weapon. She had found purpose in helping others instead of conquering them, and she had discovered that weakness and strength were not opposites, but rather different aspects of complete beings. Vex listened carefully and said that Kryn soldiers were taught that compassion made you vulnerable, but he was beginning to think compassion actually made you stronger by giving you reasons to fight beyond mere survival. Zylara agreed and explained that humans would fight desperately to protect their loved ones and their freedoms, and this made them more dangerous than Kryn, who fought only because they were ordered to. On the 10th anniversary of her arrival on Earth, the United Nations held a ceremony honoring Zylara's contributions to human development and interspecies cooperation. She stood before representatives from every nation and many alien species who had established diplomatic relations with Earth, and she spoke about the journey that brought her to this moment. She talked about crashing on an unknown planet and hiding in fear, and making the choice to trust strangers who had every reason to see her as a threat instead of someone needing help. She described how humans had protected her and welcomed her and given her opportunities to contribute rather than simply imprisoning her or using her as a bargaining chip. She explained that this treatment had taught her more about civilization than all her years of training on Kryn, because true civilization was measured not by technology or military power, but by how you treated the vulnerable. The audience listened in complete silence, and when she finished speaking, they stood and applauded, and Zilara felt tears on her face because she never imagined she would find such acceptance. Afterward, Claire found her and hugged her tight and said she was proud of her friend and everything she had accomplished, and Zilara thanked Claire for being the first person to show her kindness. Maria appeared with food as always and insisted that Zilara eat something because the ceremony had been long and she needed her strength, and Zilara laughed and accepted the plate gratefully. Danny joked that Zilara was now famous and would have to deal with people recognizing her everywhere, and Zilara said she preferred the quiet life, but understood that her story could inspire others. Patricia reminded her that the work was not finished, because Earth still had decades of preparation ahead before they would be ready to join the galactic community. As equal, Shellen added that hostile species would continue testing Earth defenses and trying to exploit any weaknesses they could find, and humanity needed to remain vigilant while staying true to their values. Zilara promised to continue helping because Earth had become her home, and humanity had become her people, and she would defend both with everything she had learned from two worlds as the celebration continued. Zilara looked around at the diverse crowd of humans and aliens working together, and she felt hopeful about the future because this was what civilization should be, not empires built on conquest and fear, but communities built on cooperation and respect where beings from different worlds could live together and learn from each other, and grow stronger through diversity. She thought about that telephone booth on Maple Street, and how terrified she had been that night hiding from hunters and facing an impossible choice between running forever or trusting strangers. The choice to trust had seemed like surrender at the time, but she now understood it was actually the bravest thing she had ever done, because it meant admitting she could not survive alone.